I like to think that a good sermon somehow answers some questions we might have, but as I thought about what I wanted to say in this one, I kept coming up with questions and not too many answers. I was very saddened, as we all were, by the bombing, death, and injuries that occurred in Boston, but I wasn't the least bit shocked by it. That bothered me almost as much as the bombing itself. How, when, and why did I become so jaded that that didn't shock me? I remember when John Kennedy was shot in 1963. I was in my high school Latin class. I remember being numb with the shock of the news of the president's violent death. I had never experienced anything like it before. Most of us hadn't. Just about everyone old enough to remember the Kennedy assassination can tell you exactly where they were and what they were doing and how they felt when they heard the news. Then there was Robert Kennedy, then Martin Luther King, then the weekly body count from Vietnam, then other wars, then planes being blown up, then the Oklahoma City bombing, the Virginia Tech shootings, 9/11, the Columbine shootings, the Amish school shootings, more wars. It goes on and on. Somewhere in the face of all that, violence has just ceased to shock me. I don't like it, but I expect it. How did this happen? In many ways, we have created a culture of violence. Think about the movies and TV shows when we were young. Good guys always won, and they did it with a minimum of violence. When we saw the Lone Ranger or Roy Rogers shooting at a bad guy, we never actually saw him die. When we watched cartoons, they didn't scare us to death, they made us laugh. Somewhere along the way, that all changed. We began to equate entertainment with shock value. If one movie shocked us with its blood and gore, the next one had to have more of it. Violence in entertainment is just like drug addiction. It keeps requiring more and more of it to get our attention. Do you realize that before the days of TV and movies, the average person never saw another person get killed, even as an actor in a role, much less for real? Now we see it daily. Our music is as guilty as TV. Have you ever listened to the lyrics of rap music? Murder, rebellion, and a general lack of moral behavior is celebrated. I don't know that any of this simulated violence is responsible for people seeing violence as an everyday solution to conflict, but I suspect it at least contributes. When you see violence every day, real or otherwise, you begin to accept it as the way things are and the way they should be. If you doubt that what we see on TV has an effect on us, think about the Super Bowl. Would companies really spend $3 million for a 30-second advertisement if they didn't influence anybody? Video games take violence a step further, and they allow the person playing to participate in it instead of just watching it. It would be nice to say that children could grow up with nonviolence as the example set for them, at least by our governments and religions, but the reality is that government and religion are probably responsible for most of the violence in the real world. Look at our own faith. Jews espouse peace, but in reality, we've been surrounded by violence almost since the beginning of our existence. But if we hadn't reacted to violence with violence, where would we be? The only true nonviolent head of government in my lifetime has been the Dalai Lama. He believes that to react to violence with more violence is to bring yourself down to the level of your aggressor. That's probably true, but the Dalai Lama has been living in exile in India for 55 years. He had to flee to stay alive. During those 55 years, the Chinese have overrun his homeland of Tibet, killed many of his people, and outlawed his faith. The biblical injunction to turn swords into plowshares is a good one in theory, but if you're in Tibet with a plowshare, when the Chinese come with swords, it will get you nothing but dead. Should we sacrifice all we hold holy to be a nonviolent people? I don't know. We in the United States will go to great lengths, even fight a war, to prevent our enemies from getting nuclear capabilities. But will we agree to disarm our own nuclear bombs? No way. When it comes to violence, our own government is a classic case of do as I say, not as I do. I believe another major contributor to the violence in our country is the current trend to mainstream mentally ill people and cut the services that are available to treat them. Yes, some of the violence we hear about is the result of terrorist hate, but a great deal of it is also the work of a mentally ill person who should be institutionalized but isn't, because there isn't enough money, space, or legal clout for that to happen. And while I'm pointing fingers at things that cause or further violence, I have to include the media. As a journalist, I usually find myself defending the media when others are attacking it. But when things like the bombing in Boston happen, I am the first to say the media is wrong. Yes, the bombing should have been reported, and the reports regularly updated. Radio and newspapers treated it that way. But television turned it into a feeding frenzy for news people who don't have enough to do on most days. The continual coverage was there when there was nothing new to say, and the invasion of bereaved people's privacy is one of the many reasons I haven't owned a TV in 35 years. The coverage, violent death and destruction gets on TV, glorifies it. It's no wonder a mentally ill, deficient, misfit person sees violence as the chance for his 15 minutes of fame. The greatest gift we can give to our children and our fellow men is to not allow ourselves to be desensitized to violence. The best way I know to do that is to turn off the TV. Senseless violence will continue to happen until we make this world we live in a kinder, less pressured place. I certainly don't have the answers on how we could accomplish that, but one thing I do know is that each of us, starting with ourselves, would be a good beginning. And if we were lucky, the children would learn from our example.